As usual, this is my favorite AI movie in terms of writing and plot. This film can be considered modern, even though it was released in 2017. It has an extraordinary story idea. An astronaut who goes on a space mission for 10 years. During his journey for research in America, this man experiences a disaster in space. The AI system they programmed encounters a hacking issue, and it seems there is an incredible conspiracy within this mission. The movie begins with a radio communication between Mission Control Head Becker and Commander Roger Nelson, permitting him to dock Magellan's spacecraft. Roger continues to communicate with Becker and his wife, Abigail Nelson, who had been worried about the launch. Roger floats around Magellan's spacecraft, checking the systems and logging in the correct information. 2.5 years before the mission, Roger and his wife are in their backyard grilling some burger patties when Abigail informs him that they'd received a call from NASA. Taking the call, he finds out that they have a mission briefing the following day to discuss an upcoming mission. Excited, Roger tells his wife. The following day, Becker gives a briefing to a group of people explaining that there have been reports of a radio anomaly that was picked up by one of their stations. He has his colleagues play the audio for Roger and Secretary Stewart so they know exactly what he meant. Becker then continues to explain that there were other consecutive anomalies following the first with an increasingly high frequency. As the three frequencies are played together, they create a perfect major triad, essentially making space music. Becker explains that the signals were actually artificial. Therefore, someone out in the galaxy was sending them. Getting up from his chair and walking to the projected image, Becker tells the group that scientists have discovered that the signal was coming from the same galaxy. Checking his computer, Matthew announces that they were able to trace these signals to 3 different locations, including the dwarf planet Eris. Stewart looks at Roger and tells him that this was why he was called into the meeting, and it would be his job to fly to each location, collect samples, and if possible, find the transmitters themselves. Roger is pretty happy about this because this has been his dream all his life, and he gladly accepts the mission, which would take place in 2.5 years. The mission was being completed by the Chinese space mission as well, so Stewart explained to Roger how important it was to get to these locations as fast as possible, forcing them to shorten the original 8-year plan to only 2. Becker tells the captain that the duration of the mission will be approximately 10 years, but assures them that he will be in stasis for most of the time. Although he's a married man, Roger finds it difficult to refuse the greatest discovery since the beginning of mankind and tells his superiors that his wife would be able to manage during his time away. Roger goes home and tells his wife the news, but Abigail becomes angry at her husband for simply signing off 10 years of their lives. He explains that she knew what she signed up for when she married him and that this was the most important thing that he could do with his life. After a brief altercation, Abigail agrees to stand by him during the entire journey. 2.5 years later, Roger has already been launched into space and is getting ready to put himself in stasis. Before he settles down in the small box, he tells Becker to take care of his wife and starts the process. Months later, Roger awakens from his deep sleep and feels his body and how weak it is after not having used it for a long time. The advanced AI unit of Magellan's spacecraft, Ferdinand, greets him and tells him to proceed with attaining his health monitors, and Roger was only 24 hours away from entering Saturn's orbit, which would be his first destination. After receiving a complete systems report, he has Ferdinand pull up all the messages and transmissions that he received from Earth, which had accumulated throughout the months. Hours later, Roger is finally able to enter Saturn's orbit safely, and after getting a good read of the land mass close to the signal, he discusses the best place to land with Magellan spacecraft's AI. While stargazing, Roger receives a transmission from Becker, who congratulates him on his safe arrival and for being the first man to achieve this goal. He also tells him that his wife Abigail sends her regards but is unwilling to send a message due to the breakdowns that she had been going through, which he promises to fill him in on after the mission. Becker reminds Roger that his main goal was to go down and find out who was sending those signals and to report back. Wishing Roger good luck, he ends the transmission. Once the message is over, Roger prepares to take the smaller ship down, and Ferdinand lets the captain know that once he is dislodged from the mothership, he'll be taken over by another AI with a female voice who sounds incredibly enthusiastic. Starting up Magellan's spacecraft, Roger begins his descent. Except for a bit of atmospheric turbulence, he lands safely. Once he arrives, he immediately leaves Magellan's spacecraft and heads to the area assumed to be the source of the signal. After traveling by foot for a while, Roger realizes the signal is coming directly from a lake made out of liquid methane. After entering the shallow lake and looking around for a bit, he finds a small black ball that he is sure is creating the signal. As he collects the sample, he sees a large methane storm headed his way and hurries back to his ship, but is unable to launch due to the risk of combustion and is forced to wait out the storm. While he waits, Roger decides to take a look at the object he had just retrieved and is shocked by a flash he sees in his head when he touches it with his bare hands. Feeling strange about the alluring feeling the object had given him, Roger picks it up and stores it properly. After the storm passes, Roger immediately launches Magellan's spacecraft and lands back on the mothership, making his way to his next destination. Once he's comfortable, he sends a transmission to Earth, informing them that he's completed the mission and showing them what he had found. Later, he takes pictures of the object to give the scientists on Earth its measurements, and he then sends another transmission, explaining that he might have already tainted the object because he touched it with his bare hands. He lets them know that the object reacted to it. Roger asks for permission to repeat the previous experiment and sends them the recording while he continues to test the rest of the samples he found on the planet. He receives another transmission from Abigail, informing him that her computer was hacked by people looking for information about the mission he was doing, and the secretary, upset with this breach, was threatening to ban Abigail from coming to mission control. Roger is obviously upset by this, but he realizes that there is not much he can do about it because he's in space. Sending a message back to his wife, he tells her that he loves her and then puts himself back into stasis. He wakes up from sleep months later, after arriving in the orbit of Neptune. Ferdinand informs him that no data had been collected on the planet due to a failed probe, so they would need to take on the task themselves. Roger asks if he's received any messages from his wife, but Ferdinand lets him know that he hasn't, although they have over 200 messages from Mission Control. Ferdinand informs the captain that during his stasis state, an anomaly occurred with the signal the sphere was transmitting. Further explaining, he lets Roger know that each time a change in the signal occurred, Roger would show a spark in his brain function as if he was dreaming, which was thought to be impossible in that state. Finding it strange, Roger picks up the sphere with gloved hands from its compartment unit and looks at it very closely, asking Ferdinand to record him. He touches the sphere and suddenly gets flashes of images in his head, making him fall. Returning the object to its compartment, he listens to a new transmission from Becker, informing him that the aircraft the Chinese had launched had an accident and all crew members were dead. After receiving the very disturbing news, Roger gears up and takes his ship, making a smooth landing on the low-gravity planet. Once he leaves Magellan's spacecraft, he makes his way down a rocky cliff and finds the second sphere lodged between two spiky stones. While climbing up the cliff, he accidentally drops the sphere and loses time trying to retrieve it, barely making it to his ship before his oxygen runs out. As soon as he arrives, he immediately starts Magellan's spacecraft so that he doesn't miss the mothership as it orbits the planet. Once he makes it to Magellan, he records another video informing Mission Control that he was successful in retrieving the second sphere and shows them the objects. Roger receives information from Ferdinand that he had been able to take some pictures from orbit while he was down and found out that there was an ocean a few kilometers below the surface of Neptune. Ferdinand further explains that he had discovered objects with different formations moving inside them with no recognizable pattern. Shocked, Roger asks if it could be fish, but Ferdinand describes its doubts. Hours later, Roger receives a transmission from Secretary Stewart, who seems upset with the experiment video that he had sent earlier, warning him to refrain from getting closer to the object for the risk of contaminating them, as they still have no clue what they are. Stewart also tells Roger that he would be the direct contact going forward and that his wife would no longer be admitted to Mission Control. Ignoring the very annoying secretary's words, Roger touches both spheres at the same time. On day 2079, Roger launches his ship to Eris for his last mission before he can finally head home. When he gets to the dwarf planet, he leaves his ship as usual and looks around for what he assumes is the third sphere. Looking around where the signal was indicating, he locates it but notices a slimy substance covering it. Excitedly taking a sample of the substance, he heads back to the mothership. Reaching Magellan, Roger tries to dock his ship, but the mechanism seems to be closed. When he tries to inform Ferdinand, he simply tells him that the systems are functioning fine. Suddenly, Ferdinand malfunctions and speaks in Chinese, reminding Roger of the secret message Becker told him about the potential hacking of the AI by foreigners. Holding himself back from panicking, he requests Ferdinand to erase its memory before it integrates into the entire system. Once the AI systems are cleared, he overrides it so he will be able to dock manually. Hurrying inside Magellan, he gives it specific orders to protect the spacecraft from further manipulation. Completing the urgent security measures, Roger sighs in relief, feeling momentarily safe. He then puts the samples he found in the machine and waits for further confirmation of whether the samples were biological. A few minutes later, Ferdinand lets him know that the substance is organic, confirming that Roger had discovered life. Roger is ecstatic by the results, running around Magellan's spacecraft like a madman celebrating this incredible achievement. Once he calms down, he sends a transmission regarding the samples he found and their nature with glee in his eyes. He explains that the AI was still working out the kinks of the substance, but he assumes that it was some kind of bacterium. Later, Roger takes out the spheres and tries to figure out what they are. When he puts them together, he starts getting flashes of images in his mind, and suddenly the burst of energy scrambles the frequency inside Magellan's spacecraft, forcing him to pull them apart. Telling Ferdinand to record the signals, he tries the experiment again, and the AI gives Roger his assumptions as to how these spheres were able to communicate in sync with each other and further reach out to Earth. Ferdinand transmits everything that he discovered back to Mission Control and prepares the stasis box for Roger. Roger sits down in front of his computer and prepares to send a message to his wife, starting his transmission by telling her how much he loves and appreciates her for being there with him all those years. But what he had discovered now was too important to abandon, so he had chosen to follow the signals to a different location, and he apologizes for what he's about to do. He releases her from any obligation that she has to him, which was something that he should have done when he left for 10 years. Roger finishes the video and orders Ferdinand to change trajectories and head to the Oort cloud against protocol. Mission Control immediately sends back a message ordering him to return to Earth at once and to bring the beacons. They also explain that what he is doing is illegal, which technically doesn't mean anything because he is in space and they can't do anything to him anyway. Their logic is that because Magellan is US property, he can't really do whatever he wants with it, but technically he can. Becker clearly states that his orders are to return home immediately, but despite everyone's pleading, Roger continues his new course to what he feels like is something great that's waiting for him and him alone. The movie ends.